fit the description. Step out now.
Of what, officer?
Just comply.
I'm the Homeland Security Chief. Explain the stop.
You're not cooperating.
Call your supervisor. Now.
This is the moment that will cost him his badge. This is the moment that will end his career, collapse his pension, and expose his department to a lawsuit measured not in thousands, but in millions. And the officer doesn't know it yet. What you're watching isn't a traffic stop. It's a psychological contest, a quiet war over power, identity, and ego. And from the first second, the officer believes he's already won. He approaches with the confidence of someone who has never been meaningfully challenged. His posture is stiff, authoritative, rehearsed. This is a man accustomed to obedience, not dialogue. To him, compliance isn't cooperation, it's submission. And when he doesn't get it immediately, something darker surfaces. The subject remains seated, calm, upright, unshakable. That calm is interpreted as insolence. The officer hears confidence and translates it into defiance. He hears clarity and labels it disrespect. And this misinterpretation, this bias wrapped in authority, is where everything begins to unravel. Because the subject isn't just any civilian, he speaks carefully, precisely. His tone is measured, not fearful, not apologetic. He asks questions the way someone asks questions when they know the answers already. That alone disrupts the power dynamic, and the officer feels it instantly. You can hear it in the sharpness of his commands, the speed, the impatience. This is dangerous territory for an officer's career because the moment authority becomes personal, professionalism collapses. The officer doesn't articulate a lawful reason for the stop. He doesn't need to. In his mind, he relies instead on implication, on suggestion, on a phrase that has ended more careers than most officers realize. You fit the description. That sentence hangs in the air like a loaded weapon. The subject doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't posture. Instead, he pauses, lets the silence stretch. Silence is uncomfortable for insecure authority. It forces intention into the open. Of what? He asks. Now the officer is cornered, and instead of stepping back into procedure, he steps forward into ego. He chooses dominance over discretion, control over correctness. This is the first irreversible mistake. Because from this moment on, every word the officer speaks will be evaluated not just by a supervisor, but by internal affairs, federal investigators, attorneys, and a jury. The subject's dignity becomes his shield. His calm becomes a weapon. He identifies himself, not loudly, not arrogantly, but clearly. He states his position: federal, Homeland Security, senior leadership, the kind of role that understands jurisdiction, authority, and misconduct from the inside out. And for half a second, the officer hesitates. That hesitation matters. It's the brief flicker where his mind realizes he may have miscalculated, where the script he relies on no longer applies, but instead of adjusting, he doubles down. Ego rarely retreats. It escalates. He dismisses the information, waves it off, treats it like a bluff. This is the moment his fate is sealed, because ignoring a civilian's rights is misconduct. Ignoring a federal official's identification is catastrophic. The officer's tone hardens. His words become clipped, predatory. He begins narrating authority instead of exercising it. This isn't law enforcement anymore. It's theater. And the audience is growing. Every second this continues, the liability compounds. The subject never insults him, never threatens, never raises his voice. That restraint is intentional. He understands something the officer doesn't. The camera isn't just recording images, it's recording character. And the officer's character is cracking. He orders the subject out of the vehicle without cause. He frames compliance as resistance. He redefines calm as hostility. Each mischaracterization pushes him further outside the protection of policy. This is why this moment is so dangerous for his career. Because once an officer abandons objectivity, the footage speaks louder than any report ever could. The subject asks for a supervisor. That request is lawful, reasonable, protected. The officer refuses. Refusal is not strength. It's fear disguised as control. He believes calling a supervisor would undermine him. What he doesn't realize is that refusing to call one will destroy him. Dispatch crackles in the background. A radio flag appears. The stop has been marked, logged, time-stamped. Now this encounter is no longer isolated. Now there is a record. The officer doesn't know it yet, but several miles away, a supervisor is already watching this unfold in real time, seeing the posture, hearing the tone, recognizing the signs of a stop that's gone wrong. And in the final seconds of this part, as the subject calmly repeats his request, voice steady, eyes forward, the officer reaches for a decision that cannot be undone. His hand moves toward his radio, not to de-escalate, but to assert control one last time. And that is where everything changes. By the time the officer keys his radio, the outcome is already written. He just sees it yet. His voice comes through controlled but strained, not the calm confidence of command. This is performance. He asks for backup. He frames the subject as uncooperative. That word is deliberate, strategic. It's the word officers use when the facts don't support the force they're about to apply. And this is where the danger escalates from career-threatening to life-altering, because every false label spoken over that radio becomes evidence. The subject hears it. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't correct him on air. He allows the lie to exist, because lies, when preserved on official channels, rot from the inside. He understands systems. He understands investigations. He knows that the most damaging thing an officer can do is narrate misconduct in his own voice. The officer steps closer. Too close. It's subtle, but it matters. Distance is control. Closing it without cause signals intent. His jaw tightens as his authority continues to be questioned. Not loudly, not aggressively, but simply by the presence of a man who refuses to shrink. This is the second irreversible mistake. The officer begins issuing overlapping commands, contradictory ones. Step out. Stay still. Hands visible. Why aren't you listening? This tactic creates confusion. Confusion justifies force. It's an old pattern, one that internal affairs knows well. The subject responds the same way every time. Slowly, clearly, respectfully. I am complying. I am calm. I am requesting a supervisor. Each sentence is a legal anchor. Each one tightens the noose. This is why this moment is so dangerous for the officer's career, because force used against calm compliance doesn't just look bad. It looks intentional. Backup arrives, and with it, the illusion of strength. Two more officers approach. Younger, quieter. Their body language is different. Curious, cautious. They sense something is off. They look not at the subject, but at their colleague, at his rigidity, at the way he's lost control of the scene without realizing it. Power dynamics shift instantly. Now it's no longer officer versus civilian. It's officer versus scrutiny. The lead officer starts talking more, explaining himself without being asked, over-justifying, filling silence with authority-laced commentary. This is the sound of someone trying to stay ahead of consequences. The subject finally steps out of the vehicle, slowly, deliberately, hands visible. He does everything right, almost perfectly, too perfectly. And that's when the officer snaps. You don't move unless I tell you. That line is pure ego, because the subject already did exactly what he was told. This is the third mistake, the one investigators call manufactured non-compliance. The officer reaches out, grabs the subject's arm, not violently, not yet, but unnecessarily. And unnecessary contact is the gateway to unlawful force. The subject stiffens, not in resistance, but in dignity. "Do not touch me," he says calmly. "I am not resisting." That sentence detonates the situation, because now the officer must either release him or escalate, and he chooses escalation. The grip tightens, the tone sharpens, commands turn into threats. The backup officers exchange looks. One of them shifts uncomfortably. He knows this isn't right. He knows this footage will be reviewed frame by frame. This is the moment that ends careers, not just because of what happens, but because of who witnesses it. The subject identifies himself again, clearly, firmly: Homeland Security, senior leadership, credentials offered, badge visible. And for the first time, fear flashes across the officer's face. Not concern, not caution, fear. Because now the power dynamic has fully inverted. The man he tried to dominate isn't just informed, he's connected. He understands federal oversight, civil rights divisions, consent decrees, criminal referrals. He understands that this interaction will not stay local. The officer hesitates. Too late. A supervisor's voice cuts through the radio. "Stand by. I'm en route." Those words change everything. From this second forward, every action is no longer about control, it's about damage control. The officer releases his grip, steps back, his posture collapses slightly. He starts reframing, softening language, suddenly polite, suddenly procedural. The shift is dramatic and devastating because abrupt tone changes don't signal professionalism, they signal guilt. The subject says nothing. He doesn't need to. The damage is already done. When the supervisor arrives minutes later, the scene is quiet, calm, almost mundane, but that calm is deceptive. Underneath it lies a sequence of decisions that will be dissected in depositions, hearings, and courtrooms. The supervisor listens, watches, asks one simple question the officer can't answer cleanly. "What was your probable cause?" There is a pause. That pause will echo for years, because in that silence lives the truth. There was none. And as the supervisor turns toward the subject, addressing him with respect, recognition, and apology, the officer realizes something terrifying. This wasn't a bad stop. This was a career-ending one. And the sentence that will later appear in court documents, media headlines, and sentencing memos hasn't even been written yet. But it's already inevitable. By the time the supervisor finishes listening, the stop is already dead. What remains is the aftermath. The officer stands slightly behind the group now, not leading, not directing, observing, reduced. His earlier authority has drained out of him, replaced by something thinner and more brittle: self-preservation. He watches the supervisor speak to the subject with a tone he never used himself: measured, respectful, careful. That contrast is fatal, because the fastest way to expose misconduct is to place it next to professionalism. The subject produces his credentials again. Calm hands, controlled movements. The supervisor's demeanor changes instantly, shoulders square, voice lowers. He knows exactly who he's dealing with now, and more importantly, who his officer decided to challenge. This is the moment the officer realizes the scale of his mistake. Not because the subject is powerful, but because the subject understands power. The supervisor asks a second question, quieter this time. "Did you explain the reason for the stop?" The officer answers too quickly. "Yes." The bodycam disagrees. This is why this moment is dangerous for his career, because video doesn't argue, doesn't reinterpret, doesn't forget. It preserves the exact second a narrative collapses. The supervisor doesn't confront him. Not yet. He doesn't need to. He simply nods and turns back to the subject, apologizing for the inconvenience, for the confusion, for the behavior. Apologies from supervisors are never casual. They are signals. The officer hears it as betrayal, as abandonment. His jaw tightens again, but this time there's nowhere for that tension to go. No civilian to dominate, no authority left to assert. The stop is terminated. No citation, no warning, no justification, just silence. As the subject returns to his vehicle, he pauses, not to gloat, not to threaten, but to say something that will haunt the officer far longer than any suspension ever could. "I hope you learn from this." That sentence is devastating because it isn't angry, it's disappointed. And disappointment implies judgment. Within 48 hours, the footage is flagged, not by the department, but by a federal oversight office. The subject doesn't need to file a complaint. The system does it for him. That's the irony of power exercised quietly. It activates mechanisms the aggressor never sees coming. Internal Affairs opens an investigation. Then another agency joins. Then another. Each one asks the same questions. Each one hears the same audio. Each one watches the same moment where ego overrides policy. Patterns emerge. The officer has prior complaints. Nothing sustained. Nothing proven. But patterns don't need convictions. They need consistency. Tone, language, escalation, the same phrases, the same posture, the same outcome. You fit the description. That sentence becomes central because no description ever existed. Prosecutors don't rush. They never do. They build. They contextualize. They layer this stop against others. They compare radio traffic. They examine use of force reports. They analyze how often calm civilians are labeled uncooperative. And slowly, methodically, a picture forms. Not of a mistake, but of a mindset. This is where the case crosses the line from misconduct to criminality. Civil rights violations aren't loud. They're procedural. They hide inside authority. And when they surface, they don't end with termination. They end with charges. The officer is placed on administrative leave, then unpaid, then terminated. Each step strips away a layer of protection he thought was permanent. His union can't save him. The footage is too clean, the subject too composed, the contrast too stark. Civil court comes first. The settlement is large, embarrassingly large, taxpayer-funded, public. But it doesn't stop there. Federal charges follow. False statements. Deprivation of rights under color of law. Obstruction. Each count is built not on speculation, but on his own words, on his own radio traffic, on his own commands, on his own ego. In court, the defense tries to argue confusion, stress, split-second decisions. The jury watches the footage. They see no chaos. They see no threat. They see a calm man asserting dignity, and an officer punishing him for it. Sentencing is quiet. No speech, no apology, just numbers. 12 years. The badge is long gone by then. So is the pension. So is the uniform that once insulated him from consequence. What remains is a cell, and the memory of a traffic stop that should have lasted 2 minutes. This is how careers end, not with violence, but with arrogance, preserved forever on camera.